The door to Commander Jake Morrison's quarters hissed open and he nearly choked on his coffee. Standing in the doorway was Ambassador Vexa of the Kithari Empire, 7 feet of blue-scaled muscle wrapped in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the ship's lighting. Her 4 amber eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made his stomach drop. "I received your summons," she said, her voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through his chest. "I am here." Jake's mind raced backward through the last 10 minutes. He had been testing the ship's new universal translation software, sending sample messages to check for glitches. One of those test messages had been a joke copied from an old movie script. He remembered typing it with a smirk on his face, selecting a random contact from the crew manifest to test the delivery system. He had selected the wrong contact. "Ambassador, I need to explain something," he started, but Vexa was already stepping into his quarters, the door sliding shut behind her. "Explain what?" Her head tilted, the movement sharp and predatory. "You have requested my presence in your private chambers. Among my people, such a summons carries significant meaning." Jake felt cold sweat forming on the back of his neck. The Ketharari were from Kethros Prime, a Category 12 death world where everything from the weather to the wildlife existed in a constant state of trying to kill everything else. Their culture was built on direct action and absolute commitment. They did not understand accidents or casual mistakes. "What kind of meaning?" he asked carefully. Vex's scales shifted color slightly, moving from deep blue to something closer to purple. "It is either a challenge to combat or a declaration of mating interest. Given that you sent no weapon specifications with your message, I assumed the latter." The coffee mug slipped from Jake's fingers and shattered on the floor. "I should inform you," Vexa continued, stepping closer, "that I find your species fascinating. You are small and fragile, yet you have spread across the stars faster than any race in recorded history. Your homeworld is barely a Category 4, yet you fight like creatures born of fire and chaos." "Ambassador, there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" She was close now, close enough that he could see the intricate pattern of scars that decorated her scales. "Battle honors," he remembered from his briefing. Each one represented a kill. There were hundreds of them. The message was a test. "A technical test of our translation software. I didn't mean to send it to you." On Kethros Prime, stillness usually preceded an explosion of violence. "You summoned a daughter of the Crimson House by accident?" Jake's hand moved slowly toward the emergency comm panel on the wall. "Yes. And the words you sent, requesting my presence in your chamber, these were meaningless sounds? They were from an old Earth Entertainment recording, a joke." The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats, then 4. Then 5. Vex's mandibles clicked together in a sound Jake couldn't interpret. "Your species amuses me, Commander Morrison. On my world, such a mistake would require the offender to either complete the challenge they accidentally issued or surrender their life in compensation for the insult." "Which option would you prefer?" Jake asked, surprised by how steady his voice remained. Something shifted in Vex's expression. Her scales rippled through 3 different colors in rapid succession. "I have not yet decided," she said. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez was halfway through her diagnostics report when the priority alert flashed across her console. She frowned, pulling up the source. Someone had triggered a silent distress beacon from the officer quarters deck. The signal was heavily encrypted, using a code sequence that hadn't been updated since the last war. She recognized it immediately because she had helped design it during her intelligence training days. It was Commander Morrison's personal beacon. Elena was out of her chair and moving before she consciously made the decision. She grabbed her sidearm from the weapons locker and headed for the nearest transit tube. The ship's internal sensors showed 2 life signs in Morrison's quarters. 1 human, 1 Kethari. The Kethari biosignature was spiking with what the computer interpreted as elevated aggression hormones. This was bad. This was very bad. The Kethari were allies, technically. The treaty between the Human Confederation and the Kethari Empire was barely 6 months old, forged in the aftermath of a conflict that had nearly destroyed both civilizations. Ambassador Vexa was aboard the Redemption as part of a cultural exchange program designed to build trust between the 2 species. If something happened to her, or if she did something to Morrison, the treaty would collapse. War would resume, billions would die. Elena reached the officer deck in under 2 minutes. She paused outside Morrison's door, pressing her ear against the metal. She could hear voices inside, but the soundproofing made it impossible to understand the words. She input her override code and the door slid open. Inside, she found Morrison standing with his back against the far wall. Ambassador Vexa stood in the center of the room, her posture rigid, her claws extended. Between them, On the floor lay the shattered remains of a coffee mug. "Lieutenant Commander?" Vexa said without turning around. "Your timing is interesting." Elena kept her hand near her weapon but didn't draw it. "Ambassador. Commander. Is there a problem here?" Morrison's eyes met hers, and she saw something unexpected in them. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the expression of a man who had just realized he was standing on a pressure-activated explosive and couldn't remember which wire to cut. "We were just having a cultural discussion," he said. "Your commander has issued me an invitation," Vexa added. "We are negotiating the terms." Elena processed this information rapidly. Invitation, terms, negotiation. These were not words typically associated with imminent violence. "What kind of invitation?" she asked. Vex's mandibles clicked again. "The kind that does not concern subordinate officers." Morrison winced visibly. "Ambassador, perhaps we should include Lieutenant Commander Vasquez in this conversation. She's my second in command, and she has experience with diplomatic protocols." "Diplomatic protocols?" Vexa turned her head, all four eyes focusing on Elena with uncomfortable precision. "Is that what humans call it now?" Elena's confusion deepened. She glanced at Morrison, silently demanding an explanation. "I accidentally sent the ambassador a message," he said. "A test message for the translation software. It apparently carried certain implications in Kithari culture." "What implications?" Vexa answered before Morrison could. "Your commander has proposed a mating bond. Among my people, such proposals are sacred. They cannot be withdrawn once issued." Elena's jaw dropped. "There has to be a way to resolve this diplomatically," she said, recovering quickly. "Our cultures are different." "Surely there's precedent for cross-cultural misunderstandings." "There is," Vexa agreed. "The offending party may submit to a trial of worthiness. If they fail, they die. If they succeed, the proposal stands and must be honored. And if Commander Morrison simply apologizes?" Vex's scales darkened to almost black. "Then I would be required by honor to kill him, burn this ship, and return his ashes to his family with a formal declaration of blood feud that would last 7 generations. The room went very quiet. "Trial of worthiness it is," Morrison said. The trial began at exactly midnight ship time. The entire crew had been confined to quarters by order of Captain Rodriguez, who had listened to Elena's report with an expression that suggested he was seriously reconsidering his career choices. Only essential personnel were permitted to observe the proceedings, which took place in the ship's main cargo bay. Morrison stood at one end of the cleared space wearing nothing but standard exercise clothing. Vexa stood at the other end, her ceremonial armor replaced by a simple combat harness that left most of her scaled body exposed. Between them, a circle had been drawn in some kind of luminescent powder that Ambassador Vexa had produced from her personal effects. According to Kithari tradition, whoever stepped outside the circle first would be considered defeated. "The rules are simple," Vexa announced, her voice carrying easily through the silent bay. "We fight until one of us cannot continue or leaves the circle. No weapons. No outside assistance. No surrender." Morrison nodded, rolling his shoulders to loosen the tension in his muscles. "And if I win?" "Then you will have proven your worth as a potential mate. The proposal will be considered fulfilled through combat rather than consummation." "What does that mean exactly?" Vex's mandibles spread in what Morrison had learned to recognize as a Kithari smile. "A war marriage, as my people call it. You would have the protection of my house without the obligations of partnership." "That sounds almost reasonable." "Do not mistake my offer for mercy, Commander. I fully intend to break every bone in your body." The signal to begin was given by Captain Rodriguez, who looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. Vexa moved first, crossing the distance between them with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature her size. Morrison barely managed to dodge her initial strike, a sweeping claw attack that would have opened him from shoulder to hip. He rolled under her extended arm and came up behind her, driving an elbow into the sensitive spot where her scales met at the base of her spine. Vexa grunted in surprise. The sound was small, almost imperceptible, but Morrison heard it clearly. The briefings he had studied mentioned that specific vulnerability. The Kithari were heavily armored everywhere except the joints and connection points of their scales. He had maybe a 2-second advantage before she adjusted her strategy. He used it to put as much distance between them as the circle allowed. "You studied our anatomy," Vexa observed, turning to face him. "Standard intelligence protocol for all diplomatic missions." "Clever." She advanced again, but slower this time, her movements more controlled. Most humans rely on weapons and numbers. You chose knowledge. My grandmother always said that the brain was the best weapon. Your grandmother was wise. Vexa feinted left, then struck from the right with blinding speed. Morrison caught her wrist, using her own momentum to redirect her past him. It was a technique borrowed from half a dozen Earth martial arts, adapted for opponents with superior strength. The key was to never meet force with force. Instead, you guided your enemy's power away from you and let them defeat themselves. Vexa stumbled, caught herself, and spun with a kick that caught Morrison in the ribs. He felt at least one of them crack, maybe two. The pain was extraordinary, but he had experienced worse during survival training on Mars. He stayed on his feet. That was what mattered. You should have fallen, Vexa said, something new entering her voice. Was that respect? Curiosity? I've been hit harder. By what? A drill instructor named Sergeant Patterson. She used to say that pain was just weakness leaving the body. Vexa laughed. The sound was harsh and strange, like stones grinding together, but it was unmistakably a laugh. I think I would have liked your Sergeant Patterson. They circled each other, both now moving with more caution. Morrison's ribs screamed with every breath, but he forced himself to ignore the sensation. Pain could be processed later. Right now, he needed to survive. Why did you accept this trial, he asked. Partly to buy time, partly because he genuinely wanted to know. Because you were interesting, Vexa replied. In 6 months of traveling with your kind, I have seen humans do impossible things. You terraform hostile worlds for entertainment. You consume substances that would kill most species and call it recreation. You have colonized more systems in 2 centuries than my people conquered in 10,000 years. We're stubborn. You are terrifying. Vex's eyes gleamed in the cargo bay lighting. And I wanted to know if you were terrifying enough to be worthy. She attacked again, and this time Morrison knew he couldn't dodge completely. He chose to take the blow on his left shoulder rather than his injured right side, absorbing the impact as best he could while driving his knee up into Vex's midsection. They both staggered back, breathing hard. Worthy enough yet? Morrison gasped.
Almost, Vexa admitted. But the trial is not over. The fight lasted another 23 minutes.
By the end of it, Morrison could barely stand. His left arm hung useless at his side, dislocated at the shoulder. His ribs had graduated from cracked to definitely broken. His face was a mask of blood from a cut above his eyebrow that wouldn't stop bleeding, but he was still inside the circle. Vexa wasn't in much better shape. Her scales were cracked in several places, leaking the pale blue fluid that served as Kithari blood. One of her 4 eyes was swollen shut. She favored her left leg heavily, suggesting Morrison's desperate kick to her knee had done more damage than he'd hoped. They faced each other across the space, both swaying slightly, both refusing to fall. You fight well, Vexa said, her voice rough with exhaustion. Better than any creature from a Category 4 world has any right to fight. Humans are full of surprises. Yes, she nodded slowly. You are. Vexa straightened, visibly forcing her body to obey through sheer willpower. I could continue this battle. My injuries are severe but not debilitating. In time, your endurance would fail, and I would claim victory. Morrison said nothing. He knew she was right. But that would prove nothing, Vexa continued. You have already demonstrated your worth. Continuing would only satisfy my pride, and pride is a poor reason to break a warrior. She stepped backward, her heel crossing the edge of the luminescent circle. The cargo bay erupted in shocked murmurs from the watching crew members. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his face pale. Ambassador? Did you just... I yielded the field, Vexa confirmed. Commander Morrison is victorious. Morrison felt his knees threaten to buckle. He locked them through desperate will alone. Why? Vexa approached him slowly, stopping close enough that he could see the individual scales on her face. Because you earned my respect, human, and because I realized something during our battle. What? I do not wish to kill you. Her mandibles spread in that grinding smile. I wish to know you better.
A war marriage will allow that without the complications of a true bond.
She extended her hand, palm up, in what Morrison recognized from his briefings as a gesture of alliance among the Cathari. From this moment, you are under the protection of the Crimson House. My enemies are your enemies. My honor is your honor. This is my pledge to you, Jake Morrison of Earth. Morrison placed his own hand atop hers. Her scales were warm, almost hot, and he could feel the strength in her fingers even though she was barely applying pressure. I accept your pledge, she said, hoping he was remembering the traditional response correctly, and offer my own in return. Vexa's eyes widened slightly. You would pledge yourself to me? A human commander pledging alliance to a Cathari house? Why not? You said it yourself. Our species are connected now. Maybe this is how we start building something real between our peoples. The cargo bay had gone completely silent. Every human present seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see how the ambassador would respond. Vexa was still for a long moment. Then she laughed again, that strange grinding sound that Morrison was starting to find oddly comforting. You are either the bravest human I have ever met, she said, or the most foolish. Probably both. Probably. She released his hand and turned to address the watching crew. Hear me, humans of the Redemption. Commander Jake Morrison has won a trial of worthiness against a daughter of the Crimson House. He has earned the right to bear our mark and speak with our voice. Any who threaten him threaten the Empire itself. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his diplomatic training visibly struggling to keep pace with events. Ambassador, I'm not sure our government will know how to respond to this development. Then perhaps they should learn. Vexa looked back at Morrison, something warm flickering in her remaining 3 functional eyes. The universe is changing, Captain. The Cathari have spent millennia believing we were the strongest species in existence. Then we encountered humanity and discovered we were wrong. We're not stronger than you, Morrison said. No, Vexa agreed. You are stranger, more adaptable, more unpredictable. You do things that make no sense by our logic, and somehow those things work. She gestured at the circle, at the blood both human and Cathari that stained its interior. This trial should have been simple. I am larger, stronger, faster, and more experienced in combat than you. By every measure, I should have won easily. But you didn't. But I didn't. She shook her head slowly. Because you refused to accept that you should lose. You fought like the outcome was never in doubt, even when your body was failing. That kind of determination cannot be taught. It must be born into the blood. Morrison swayed again, and this time his legs gave out completely. He would hit the floor hard if Vexa hadn't caught him, her powerful arms supporting his weight with surprising gentleness. Medical team, she called out, her voice carrying command authority. Your commander requires attention. As the ship's medical staff rushed forward, Morrison looked up at the alien warrior who now technically qualified as some kind of wife, at least by Cathari standards. Her face was battered, her scales cracked, her body pushed to its limits. She was smiling. You know, he said, his voice slurred with exhaustion and blood loss, when I woke up this morning, I didn't expect any of this. Life rarely proceeds as expected, Vexa replied. This is one of its better qualities. The medical team arrived and began stabilizing Morrison for transport to the infirmary. As they worked, Vexa remained at his side, her presence a warm anchor in the chaos of activity. Ambassador, Captain Rodriguez said carefully, what happens now? Between our peoples, I mean, Vexa considered the question. Now, Captain, we write a new chapter. Commander Morrison and I will serve as a bridge between humanity and the Cathari. Where words and treaties have failed to build true understanding, perhaps a bond forged in combat and accidental messages will succeed. She looked down at Morrison, who was fighting to stay conscious as the medical team prepared a stretcher. Your species has a saying, she continued, something about the best-laid plans often going wrong. I believe the situation proves that sometimes the wrong plans go right. Morrison managed a weak laugh that immediately turned into a groan of pain. I think I need to send more accidental messages. Perhaps start with something less dramatic next time, Vexa suggested. A dinner invitation, maybe. Is that a request? Consider it a command from your war wife. Her mandibles clicked together in amusement. Once you are healed, you will join me for a proper meal. I want to understand how a creature from such a gentle world became capable of fighting like a demon from the burning depths. Deal, Morrison whispered, as the sedatives the medical team had administered began pulling him toward unconsciousness. But you're cooking. Vex's laughter followed him down into the darkness, strange and warm and somehow exactly right. 3 weeks later, the news of the Morrison-Vexa bond had spread across both human and Cathari space. The reaction was mixed but mostly positive, with many on both sides viewing it as a symbol of hope for lasting peace between the two civilizations. Ambassador Vexa had remained aboard the Redemption, officially to oversee Commander Morrison's recovery, but unofficially because she had developed what she described as a strong tactical interest in understanding human culture more deeply. The crew had adjusted to her presence with remarkable speed. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez had even begun teaching her human card games, which Vexa approached with the same intensity she brought to combat training. As for Morrison, he had learned 3 important lessons from the experience. First, always double-check the recipient address before sending any message, no matter how casual. Second, never underestimate the importance of cultural research when dealing with alien species. And third, sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the best outcomes. He was still contemplating these lessons when his quarters door chimed. He looked up from his recovery bed to find Vexa standing in the doorway, carrying a container that steamed with unfamiliar but surprisingly pleasant aromas. "I have prepared dinner," she announced. "As you requested." "I don't remember requesting anything. You requested that I cook. I have cooked. Now we will eat together, and you will tell me more stories about Earth." She entered the room and began setting up the meal on his small table. "I wish to understand the world that creates warriors like you." Morrison smiled, shifting carefully to avoid aggravating his still-healing ribs. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Vexa settled into the chair across from him, her 4 eyes gleaming with genuine curiosity. "Start with this, Sergeant Patterson. I believe she and I would have much to discuss." As Morrison began to speak, he realized that his accidental message had led to something far more valuable than he could have imagined. Not just an alliance between species or a political symbol for peace. A genuine connection between 2 beings who, despite their vast differences, had found common ground in stubbornness, strength, and the willingness to fight for what they believed in. And really, wasn't that what humanity had always been about? Finding connection in the most unlikely places, turning accidents into opportunities, refusing to accept that anything was impossible? The galaxy was vast and strange and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities waiting to be discovered by those brave or foolish enough to reach for them. Commander Jake Morrison had stumbled into one such possibility through a simple mistake, and as he shared dinner with his alien warwife, listening to her grinding laughter and watching her eyes light up with each new story about Earth, he knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't change a single thing. Some accidents were worth keeping.